Two women went hiking for love. One would never come back. It's night in the Appalachian wilderness, the kind of black that swallows the trees whole. The forest is breathing, cold, wet, endless. A flashlight jerks through the dark, its beams shaking across trunks slick with dew. The woman holding it is barefoot. Her name is Claudia Brenner, and she's been shot 5 times. Blood runs from her neck to her chest like a second shirt, warm against the freezing air. She crashes through underbrush, gasping, tripping, getting up again. Every breath sounds like a scream trapped in her throat. Behind her, nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just the heavy silence of a man who may or may not still be following. Her mind keeps repeating one name, Rebecca. They'd come here to be alone, away from the stares, the slurs, the whispered words that followed them in town. The forest was supposed to be safety. Now it's a labyrinth of shadows and blood. A thin dirt road appears ahead. Claudia stumbles onto it, waving her flashlight at the darkness. Her voice cracks as she shouts for help. The sound dies before it even reaches a tree line. Minutes drag like hours. Then headlights. A pair of them, growing brighter, cutting through the fog. She steps into the middle of the road, waving both arms, shaking, desperate. The car slows. For a split second she believes she's saved. Then it swerves around her and disappears into the dark. Her knees hit the gravel. She can taste iron in her mouth. She wants to lie down, to let the cold take her. But in the space between two heartbeats, something fierce wakes up inside her. The thought of Rebecca lying somewhere in the woods, bleeding, waiting. Claudia forces herself up. She starts running again. Another car comes. This time she doesn't hesitate. She plants herself in the center of the road, lifts her trembling arm, and aims the flashlight straight at the windshield. The car screeches to a stop. 2 teenage boys stare at her, their faces lit ghost white by the beam. She manages 4 words, "I've been shot." When they open the door, she collapses into their back seat, clutching a folded map soaked red at the edges. The map she and Rebecca had unfolded together 2 days earlier, laughing about how they'd never finished the whole trail. As the boys race toward the sheriff's office, sirens bloom in the distance. The forest fades behind her, swallowed by the night. But to understand how Claudia Brenner came to run bleeding through the Appalachian darkness, you have to go back to a Friday afternoon in May 1988, when she and the woman she loved parked their car at a trailhead called Dead Woman's Hollow. They weren't the first couple to hike that path, but they were the first whose footprints would end in murder. Sunlight flickers across the same forest. 2 days earlier, the camera pans over tall pines and the hum of summer insects. A car door slams. Laughter carries through trees. 2 voices, light and alive. Rebecca Wight, 29, leans over the hood of her car, spreading out a paper map. She traces the inked lines with her finger, eyes bright with excitement. Claudia Brenner, 32, steps out her own sputtering car, engine ticking from the long drive. They meet halfway between their vehicles, grinning like they've been apart for years. They hug. Quickly, carefully. Even here, miles from town, habit tells them to keep it subtle. Then they toss their backpacks over their shoulders, wave goodbye to civilization, and start the trail. Neither of them notices the quiet figure watching from the tree line. The Appalachian Trail stretches more than 2,000 miles from Maine to Georgia. It's the kind of place people go to disappear. From stress, from grief, sometimes from themselves. For Rebecca and Claudia, it was meant to be a weekend of peace, a small world of their own carved out of nature. They didn't know that someone else was already living out there. A drifter who slept in wooden shelters, hunted squirrels for food, and watched hikers from shadows. His name was Stephen Roy Carr. And in 2 days, he would decide that their love was an offense that needed to be erased. When night finally fell that first day, the couple pitched their small tent beside a fire ring. They ate canned soup, teased each other, talked about Rebecca's sister's birthday coming up that weekend. By the firelight, their faces looked calm, almost glowing. Claudia wrote a single line in her notebook, peaceful, finally. Somewhere beyond the glow of their campfire, in the shelter they'd passed earlier, a man sat awake, watching the flicker through the trees. Tomorrow, he would step out of the shadows. Tomorrow, the forest would answer their laughter with gunfire. Before the screams, before the headlines, there was just laughter, quiet, careful, and hidden in plain sight. In the late 1980s, being openly gay in America was an act of courage. In small towns, it was an act of risk. Rebecca, Wight, and Claudia Brenner had learned to move through the world like ghosts, close enough to love each other, but distant enough not to draw eyes. They'd met 3 years earlier at Virginia Tech, during a planning session for the women's group. Rebecca was 26 then, sharp, quick-witted, always the first to volunteer. Claudia was a few years older, reserved, with an architect's way of noticing everything in a room. It began with late-night stapling posters, endless coffee, and quiet smiles that lingered a beat too long. They fell in love in the safest way they could, privately. In classrooms, they were friends. In their letters, they were everything. Rebecca wrote once, "When I see you, the world slows down just enough for me to breathe." Claudia never forgot that line. They built a life around distance. When Claudia spent a semester studying architecture in Israel, they survived on postcards and occasional phone calls that cut out mid-sentence. When she moved to New York and Rebecca stayed in Virginia, they learned the geography of love, gas station coffee, long drives, weekend reunions that ended too soon. That spring, they promised themselves a real escape, 2 days to walk, talk, and exist without pretending. The Appalachian Trail was supposed to be that escape. May 12, 1988, a Thursday afternoon. Rebecca arrived first at a small parking lot carved out of Michaud State Forest. It was a cloudless day. The forest smelled of pine and damp earth. She leaned against her car, map in hand, waiting. The sign nearby read Dead Woman's Hollow Road, but she laughed at the irony. She'd always loved dark humor. When Claudia finally arrived, her old Datsun wheezing from the long climb, Rebecca was already poring over the map, tracing a loop called the Rocky Knob Trail. 2 days up, 1 day down, Rebecca said, grinning. "We'll be back Sunday for your sister's birthday." Claudia smiled. She was tired from the drive, but she'd missed that grin, the one that made everything else fade. They hugged quickly in the lot, just two friends greeting each other. They didn't dare kiss. Even in the middle of nowhere, old habits stayed. They left a note on Claudia's dashboard. "Gone camping, back Sunday." Then they drove one car to the trailhead, parked it, and stepped into the woods. The trail swallowed them almost immediately. Tall hemlocks, bird calls, the faint trickle of water somewhere beyond the trees. For the first time in weeks, no one was watching. Rebecca led the way, moving easily over the rocks. Claudia followed, careful with every step. When they reached a shallow stream, Rebecca crossed it in 3 jumps, turning back with a laugh. "Come on, city girl." Claudia hesitated, glaring playfully. "You'll be sorry when I fall in and ruin the tent." They laughed, loud and unrestrained. For once, there was no reason not to. By dusk, they reached a small clearing, a flat stretch of ground near a fire ring, perfect for a tent. Nearby stood an old wooden shelter, weathered by years of hikers. They ignored it. The tent felt safer, more private. They pitched it side by side, sharing the easy rhythm of people who'd done this before. Dinner was simple. Soup heated over the fire, crackers, the last of bottled wine they'd tucked away. As night closed around them, they talked about work, family, the future. Rebecca wanted to move north, maybe teach. Claudia wanted to design houses that didn't all look the same, places that felt alive, she said, under the stars. They talked about everything except the danger being seen. It wasn't that they hadn't faced it before. In Virginia, they'd been called names just for walking too close together. In New York, a man once spat at their feet outside a cafe. They'd learned that sometimes safety meant silence, that affection could be mistaken for a provocation. But here, surrounded by trees, there was no one to provoke, or so they thought. As they settled into their sleeping bag, one large enough for 2, the forest was calm. The only sounds were wind, crackling embers, the soft rhythm of breathing. Rebecca whispered, "You ever think about how crazy this world is? That 2 women can't just love each other without hiding." Claudia smiled into the darkness. Out here, it doesn't matter. She believed that for one night, it was true. Morning came soft and gold. The light through the trees painted everything gentle. the fire pit, the tent, their faces. The women moved lazily, still half asleep, making coffee, washing dishes in the nearby stream. They felt alone, invisible, free. They decided not to dress right away, a small rebellion against all the times they'd had to hide. The forest, they thought, could handle their honesty. They laughed as they splashed water at each other, teasing like teenagers. Rebecca filled a bottle for the trail ahead and mentioned she wanted to check out the wooden shelter nearby, just to see if there's a hiker's logbook. She loved reading the notes people left behind. Strangers crossing paths, stories written in pencil. Claudia nodded and kept drying the cups. Rebecca walked a short distance to the shelter. Inside, it was dim and smelled of smoke and mildew. And there, in the shadows, was a man. He was sitting on the floor, thin, dirty, and completely naked. His eyes didn't blink. He looked straight at her and smiled faintly, like they were old friends. "Got a cigarette?" he asked. Rebecca froze. She shook her head, turned, and walked quickly out. When she reached the tent, her voice was shaking. "We're not alone. Put your clothes on." Claudia looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "There's a man. In the shelter. He was watching us." They packed their things in silence. Every noise in the forest suddenly felt close. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. As they left the clearing, Rebecca forced a polite smile and called out, "See you later," into the trees. A man's voice echoed back cheerful, "See you later." It should have ended there. But by then, he'd already decided that it wouldn't. That morning walk was supposed to be the start of a new day, a new trail, a clean page. But as they moved deeper into the woods, laughter giving way to nervous silence, a feeling began to follow them. That strange sense you get when you're being watched. Claudia thought it was her imagination. Rebecca said nothing, but she walked a little faster. Neither of them looked back, and somewhere behind them, a man with a rifle had started to follow. The Appalachian Trail can feel infinite. Mile after mile of green corridors that look exactly the same. For hikers, that sameness is comforting. For prey, it's a nightmare. Rebecca and Claudia walked fast that morning, trying to shake off what had just happened. But the man from the shelter had carved himself into the silence between them. Every rustle made them flinch. Every shadow felt like it moved. They followed a path marked by faded paint on tree trunks, a yellow line here, a red stripe there. The map said the trail looped back near another campsite by evening. If they just kept walking, they told themselves they'd be fine. They'd lose him. But the forest didn't feel like an escape anymore. They tried to distract each other. Small talk about architecture, about Rebecca's sister's birthday. Claudia joked about how sore her legs already were. But even laughter couldn't drown out the sound behind them. A faint crack, a twig snapping, a rhythm too deliberate to be the wind. When they reached a fork in the trail, they stopped. No signs. No color markings. Just two paths disappearing into trees. Rebecca pulled out the map. "Left should loop us toward the creek," she said, turning it over. "Or maybe right. These lines are so faded." That's when they heard him. "Lost already?" The voice came from behind them. Familiar, calm, almost amused. They turned. There he was. The same man from the shelter, standing a few yards away. His clothes were filthy. His hair stuck to his forehead. And now, balanced casually on his shoulder, was a rifle. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Rebecca managed a polite, nervous smile. "We're fine, thanks." Claudia, trying to keep her voice steady, said, "Are you?" He laughed, short, sharp, wrong. "Sure. Just wondering where you're headed." The tone sent a chill through both women. Rebecca folded the map, tucking it under her arm. "Well, enjoy your hike," she said, and started walking. Claudia followed, her pulse pounding. They didn't run. They couldn't. Running meant fear, and fear might provoke him. But as soon as the trail curved, they quickened their pace. Neither looked back for a long time. When Claudia finally did, he was gone. They hiked for hours, barely speaking. Each time they stopped for water, they scanned the trees. Each time they rested, the woods seemed to hold its breath. By late afternoon, their nerves began to dull from exhaustion. Maybe he'd turned off on another trail. Maybe it was over. They reached a second clearing near a stream. Another designated campsite, almost identical to the first. It was quiet, sunlit, peaceful. Rebecca exhaled for the first time all day. "Let's stay here," she said. "We'll leave first thing in the morning." Claudia nodded. The plan made sense. The forest was huge. They'd seen dozens of hikers the day before. Odds were good they'd never see him again. They spread a ground sheet instead of pitching the tent right away, too tired to care. Rebecca kicked off her boots, stretched, and lay back to watch the light fade to the canopy. For a moment, it was perfect again. The kind of peace that makes you forget danger ever existed. They shared a can of fruit, laughed about the map, teased each other about who snored louder. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, their guard had softened. They lay close, whispering, the forest humming gently around them. Then a bird startled nearby. One loud cry, then silence. Rebecca froze. "Probably just a deer," Claudia whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She turned her head. The woods were still, too still, and somewhere behind that stillness, a man was crouched among the brush. He had been there for hours, waiting, watching. His rifle rested across his knees. His name was Stephen Roy Carr, 28 years old, a drifter who turned the forest into his home. People in the nearby town of Chambersburg had seen him before, barefoot in stores, mumbling to himself, sometimes sleeping in barns. He told strangers he liked the wilderness because it didn't judge him. He had noticed the two women the day before, laughing and holding hands. He'd watched them at the campsite that morning, through the shelter window. It made him angry, and something darker. He called it disgust. Others would later call it obsession. Now, crouched 80 feet away, he waited for the moment he thought would teach them a lesson. The last thing Claudia remembered before it happened was the sound of water trickling down the rocks nearby, and the way Rebecca's hand felt warm in hers. Then came the first gunshot. It ripped through the quiet, echoing off the hills. The bullet struck Claudia's arm, tearing flesh, sending her spinning. She screamed. A second shot hit her neck. Then another. Each one came faster. She fell, choking on her own blood. Rebecca shouted her name, scrambling toward her. Another shot cracked. This one hit Rebecca high in the back, dropping her to the ground. The air filled with smoke and ringing silence. The shooter didn't move closer. He stayed hidden, firing methodically, 8 bullets in all. Then nothing. Claudia pressed herself to the ground, gasping. Rebecca crawled toward a tree, dragging herself behind it. The smell of gunpowder mixed with blood. When the forest went quiet again, the only sound left was Rebecca whispering, "Stay down." They waited seconds, minutes, maybe longer. No footsteps came. No voice. Just the slow dripping of blood onto leaves. Rebecca reached for Claudia's hand. "We're okay," she lied. They weren't. The shooter slipped away as silently as he'd appeared, melting into the trees. He thought he'd finished what he came to do. He thought the woods would bury them both. But one of them was still breathing, and she was about to do something no one thought possible. The first thing that returns is a sound, the thin metallic ringing inside Claudia's skull, as if the forest itself were a cracked bell. Then the wet heat on her arm. Then Rebecca's voice, coming from far away and very close at the same time. "Stay down. Don't move." Leaves press into Claudia's cheek. The ground smells like cold dirt and iron. She blinks, and the beam of late sunlight splinters across the bark of a nearby tree. For a second she thinks the shots were a hallucination, some cruel echo of fear. Then she tries to lift her right hand, and a white flash tears through her arm, dropping her back to the earth. She tastes blood. Not much. Enough to know it's hers. Claude. Rebecca again, hoarse, urgent. Crawl. Another shot shreds the quiet. Bark bursts from the trunk above them in a spray. Claudia flinches, palms skidding over the ground sheet. The world narrows. Tree, dirt breath, Rebecca. She drags herself toward the trunk, shoulders bumping the roots. A second shot snaps the air, and for a heartbeat the forest is nothing but thunder. Then, as suddenly as they started, the gunshots stop. Silence returns like a held breath released. The two women press themselves behind the wide oak. The ground sheet a makeshift banner of the life they had a minute ago. Fruit can, 2 utensils, their boots kicked aside. Claudia turns and sees Rebecca's face gray at the edges, her lips parted. Her eyes searching Claudia's like she's counting the seconds out loud. There's blood at Rebecca's shoulder and high on her back, a dark blossom spreading through the shirt. Claudia knows enough to understand that spot means danger, that inside the body there are highways of blood, and that one of them has just been broken. She also knows she can't fall apart. Not here. Not now. He's gone, Claudia whispers. And even as she says it, she doesn't believe it. The forest can hide anything. A man could be 10 feet away, and the trees would keep a secret. Rebecca forces out a breath, a fragile edge of a laugh. You always say that when you're scared. I am scared. Me too. They press their foreheads together for 1 second, a small shelter inside a larger one. Then Claudia leans back, ripping a strip from the bottom of her shirt with shaking fingers. The movement sends lightning through her neck and jaw. She swallows the pain, breathes steady, and presses fabric to the wound in Rebecca's back, another to her own arm. The pressure hurts. That means it's working. She tells herself this and keeps pressing. Okay, she says, oh, nothing is okay. Okay. The light is fading. 1 hour until dark, maybe less. The creek at the edge of the campsite keeps speaking in its patient language. Above them leaves shift, a hush like a crowd in a theater waiting for the second act. Claudia listens for a footstep and hears only the sound that has always calmed her, Rebecca breathing. Slow, too slow. We can't wait, Rebecca says. Her teeth chatter. You have to go. Claudia shakes her head, so hard the world wobbles. No, you have to. Rebecca's voice is soft but unyielding, the tone she used when she wanted something built correctly, a line straight, a door hung true. You're faster than you think. There's a road. Remember the map. 3 miles if you cut toward the ridge. Go. I'm not leaving you. The sentence feels like a vow she signed her name to years ago. If you don't, neither of us leaves. Rebecca's hand finds hers and squeezes, astonishingly strong, as if she's transferring something through skin, permission, courage, goodbye. Listen to me. Wrap me in the sleeping bag. Keep your hands for you. Run. It takes Claudia a full 30 seconds to accept the order. When she finally loosens her grip, the air is colder. She crawls across the ground sheet, grabs a double sleeping bag, the one they joked would solve the geometry of 2 bodies in 1 tent, and pulls it open with her teeth. She shakes it around Rebecca like a cocoon, tucking edges beneath her hips, beneath her shoulder. The sight of Rebecca inside that insulated shell makes Claudia's stomach twist. The bright fabric looks like a flag planted by a future she refuses to accept. Say it, Rebecca whispers. What? That you'll go. Claudia nods once. She won't say the word, but she will move. She tightens a strip of fabric around Rebecca's shoulder, another around her own neck where the skin feels hot and strange. She pulls on her boots without socks. The laces shake under her fingers. She grabs the map, creases soft from years of hands, folds it down to the section that matters, and shoves it into her pocket. The flashlight is slick with sweat and blood. She wipes it on her thigh. Rebecca's eyes are clear for a moment. Find the road. Find help. I'll be here. I'll be back, Claudia says, and this time it is a vow. She looks once more into the trees, scans the understory for any flicker of movement, any shimmer of predator in the brush. Nothing. The forest will give no guarantees. She lowers herself, keeps the trunk between them and the open clearing, and begins to move. The first step feels like treason. The second is worse. By the 5th, she understands that the body chooses survival even when the heart refuses. Her legs settle into a staggering rhythm. The ground rises and falls as if it has its own breath. She doesn't pick a trail. She makes one, slicing a straight line through saplings and thorn. The map is alive in her head. Ridgeline, creek, road, and the distance between those words and air feels like something she can span if she keeps moving. Behind her, the campsite vanishes, consumed by 100 identical trees. This, She realizes is what the man counted on, that in a place where everything looks the same, no one can find anything again. She pushes the thought away and remembers the practical. Landmarks, compass points, the way the sun angles down. She angles with it. She runs. Her arm screams in protest. Her neck gurgles when she breathes, a wet rattle that sets every nerve on fire. She keeps one hand pressed to her throat when the pain spikes, then returns it to the brush to push branches aside. She is a machine of 3 parts now. Legs, lungs, light. Minutes slide into a relentless now. She stumbles, shoves up, stumbles again. Once she goes down hard on both knees and the flashlight tumbles, beams spinning wild circles on the leaves like a frantic moon. She claws for it, grabs it, keeps going. She thinks of a class she took years ago where an instructor said the forest after dark is just a different kind of ocean. Swim, don't fight. Let the current be part of you. She doesn't know if that's wisdom or madness, but she sails through the black as if there's a lighthouse somewhere ahead, and the light is shaped like Rebecca's face. When the ridgeline rises, steeper than she planned, she grits her teeth and climbs. The bark is rough under her palms. The slope punishes her lungs. Halfway up she hears something. A pop too clean to be a branch. She freezes, kills the flashlight, and lets the night wrap around her like camouflage. The dark carries its own geography. The small animal rustle over there. The water hush below. The distant insect drone like a constant prayer. No footsteps. She waits until the waiting itself becomes a threat. Then she moves again. At the crest she sees it. An absence of trees with sky opens wider, the suggestion of a road beyond the second ridge. 2 more valleys. She keeps the beam low, skimming the ground like a river of light. When memory tries to drag her back, Rebecca at the fire, Rebecca's hand in hers, she lets the images come, not as anchors but as fuel. She is not running away. She is carrying Rebecca forward with every step. The first valley smells of fern and cold stone. The second smells of pine and something sharp, like rain on iron. The map in her pocket is a talisman she doesn't dare unfold. The trail in her head is clearer. She checks the moon behind the clouds. There or not there, it still helps and moves with it, counting 100 steps. Breathe. 99. Breathe. By the time she reaches the final rise, her legs wobble from lactic acid and shock. She keeps moving anyway. The last brush gives way to a narrow cut through the trees, and then she is on gravel, loose, treacherous, miraculous gravel. She is on the road. For a long moment she only stands there, swaying, the flashlight trembling in her fist. The road is a slice of darkness laid across more darkness. No houses, no fence posts, nothing but absence stretching east and west. She turns left because left feels like morning. She starts walking, then half jogging, the gravel crunching under her boots a sound so loud she wants to apologize to the night for breaking it. Headlights. Far, then closer. The twin moons rise over a bend, and her throat tightens with relief, so fierce it's almost pain. She steps into the lane, signaling, waving the beam in slow circles like she's flagging a plane to safety. The car slows, the hood gliding past her shoulder, and for a heartbeat she sees the driver's face, a man in his 30s wide-eyed, and then the engine growls, and the car pulls around her, red taillights shrinking, vanishing. She stands stunned, the silence slamming back into her. A small animal darts across the ditch. The road is empty again. The thought comes, lie down, just for a second. Close your eyes. Let the dark be a blanket. She swallows it. She is not a person who lies down. She is a person with a mission. The next set of headlights appears 10 minutes later, or 2, or a lifetime. The math of shock doesn't care. She walks into the center of the road again, bracing her knees, planting her feet, holding the light high and steady so it becomes a halo around her face. The car slows to a crawl. Inside, 2 teenagers lean forward, their mouths open. The passenger window slides down. "Ma'am." "I've been shot," she says, the words clipped and unreal, as if she's reading from a script someone else wrote. "My girlfriend is back there. She's hurt worse." She points with the flashlight, drawing a jagged line into the trees. "Please, the sheriff's office." They unlock the door. She falls into back seat, and the boys look at each other with a kind of terrified bravery that makes her want to tell them they're doing fine. The driver turns the car around, tires hissing on gravel. The passenger twists in his seat. Do you need a hospital? Soon, she says. Map. She drags a paper from her pocket, unfolds it on her knees, the blood-slick edges sticking to her skin. Here. She circles a patch with her finger. There. That's where she is. The passenger nods too fast, as if speed can make the world behave. The driver presses the accelerator. Trees flicker by in high beams. Fence posts. A mailbox. The shape of a dog in a yard, and then nothing again. Sirens appear behind them. Grow louder. Pass. Flee ahead. Then vanish down a side road toward the sheriff's office. The boys chase the sound like sailors following a lighthouse. The room at the station is too bright. The floor too clean. Claudia tries to stand and her knees give. Hands catch her. Uniforms, calm voices. Someone saying her name as if they've known her forever. She keeps the map in her fist and refuses to let go until they bring a pen, and she marks the exact curve of the creek, the loop of the trail, the small flat place where the sleeping bag glowed like a warning. She gives them the words she has left like currency, tree, stream, roots, 8 shots, a man in a shelter, a rifle balanced on a shoulder as casual as a broomstick. They ask her to lie down. She shakes her head. Find her first, she says. We're sending everyone, the deputy promises. Rangers, state police, medics. We'll get to her. Claudia believes and doesn't. Belief isn't the point. The point is velocity. She squeezes the deputy's wrist until her knuckles turn white. She's wrapped in the bag. Talk to her when you find her. Tell her I'm coming. We will. They put her on a stretcher. She protests until a woman in scrubs leans close and says, You did it. You got here. Now let's do our part. The voice is so certain that Claudia gives in, not because she's convinced, but because her body has reached the edge of what it can carry. The gurney rolls. Doors open. The night pours over her again, and then lifts away as the ambulance swallows her. Inside, lights hum, machines beep. The air smells like alcohol and latex and safety. A paramedic presses gauze to her neck. Another starts a line. A third speaks into a radio, translating the forest to coordinates. She stares at the ceiling and thinks of the exact way Rebecca's fingers curve when she holds a pen. She holds that image the way a climber holds a ledge. The ambulance lurches. Somewhere out there, sirens split and multiply, heading toward a point on a map 2 women chose because it looked like peace. The forest, ancient, indifferent, receives the newcomers with the same hush it gave the man who fired the shots. Engines idle. Door latches clack. Boots sink into leaf mold. Flashlights rake the understory. Voices take on the tone professionals use when they're being louder than fear. Rebecca, a ranger calls softly. The syllables tailor for comfort. Rebecca, it's the police. We're here to help. The beam finds a flash of color at the base of a tree. The shape inside the sleeping bag is smaller than a person should be. An officer kneels, speaks in a voice people learn when they've held the hands of too many strangers. He tells her his name. He tells her they're here now. He tells her she isn't alone. The forest holds its breath again, as if waiting for permission to exhale. Back in the ambulance, Claudia's vision blurs and sharpens. The paramedic says her name to keep her tethered. She answers to prove she still can. She doesn't ask the question, her eyes keep writing on the ceiling. Not yet. Asking makes things real. For now there is only motion, the relentless forward pull toward fluorescent light, and white walls and the human miracle of intervention. They bring her into the small rural hospital. The room is too warm. Fingers probe carefully. Voices measure damage in syllables. Someone says transfer. Someone else says helicopter. And the word rises above the others like a blessing. She wants to argue, to insist that no one flies anywhere until Rebecca is safe. But a nurse she hasn't seen before squeezes her hand and says, They're still with her. It's not a promise, not a report. It's a rope across a river, and Claudia steps onto it because there is nothing else to step onto. The whump-whump of the rotor beats a new rhythm into the night. Through the window, she catches a sliver of stars and thinks, irrationally, that Rebecca can see the same ones through the canopy, and therefore they are connected by something older than fear. She closes her eyes as the helicopter climbs. The world falls away. The courthouses and highways and small towns where people whisper what they think love should be, and the forest shrinks into a dark quilt stitched with small squares of light. At the trauma center, the world becomes choreography. Voices, lights, gloved hands, the slide of metal, the hush before the next instruction. Claudia surrenders to it the way you surrender to the sea in a storm, curled around your breath in the name of the person you love. When the anesthesia gathers at the edges of her vision and begins its slow tide in, she says the name out loud as if that will anchor her to the deck. Rebecca. The room blurs. The tide rises. Just before it covers her, she hears a voice at her ear, calm, certain, like a lighthouse keeper who has seen 100 storms and still believes in morning. You survived the forest. The voice says, now let's bring you back. The lights dim to nothing. The night unthreads itself and rewinds to that first step into the trees. The smell of pine, the warmth of a hand. The world goes quiet. Outside, on the other side of the city's glow, searchers move methodically through the woods, marking sign, following a dotted line from a trampled patch of ferns to a scrap of fabric to place where a sleeping bag rises like a small hill against the roots of an oak. They work with the patience of people who know that in the wilderness the difference between minutes and forever is sometimes only the width of a trail. They speak in low voices. They kneel not as supplicants, but as witnesses. They do their work. They do not leave. When dawn begins to thin the dark at the horizon, the forest exhales at last. Somewhere a bird calls the first note of morning. The light finds the bark of 1,000 trees and makes each one shine. The men and women in uniform step back, quiet, the way people do in places that have briefly become sacred. The day begins again, not as an answer, but as a fact. Claudia will wake into that day with tubes and stitches, and the knowledge that her body has survived what should have ended it. She will ask the questions she has held back, and the world, soft-voiced and unblinking, will begin to tell her the truth. For now, the helicopter's hum fades into the brightening sky, and the forest holds two things at once. The memory of gunfire and the certainty that someone ran, bleeding, stubborn, unstoppable, through the dark, carrying love like a torch. Morning arrived pale and colorless over Michaud State Forest, spreading light across the search grid of uniforms and volunteers. The quiet was almost devotional. They found Rebecca Wight where Claudia's map had promised, wrapped in the sleeping bag, one hand resting over her heart as though she'd simply paused mid-sentence. A ranger bent to check for a pulse he already knew wasn't there. Another whispered, "We've got her." The forest, after a night of chaos, went still again. Word of the attack traveled faster than the medevac carrying Claudia. By noon, every station in Franklin County was broadcasting fragments of a story no one could quite believe. 2 women shot on the Appalachian Trail, one dead, one barely alive. Reporters descended on the small hospital where Claudia lay bandaged and silent. The first detectives arrived at the crime scene before the body was even moved, tracing 8 spent .22 casings in a rough semicircle. Each one pointed back toward the ridge, toward the place where the shooter had hidden. They found his footprints, bare and narrow, leading to a shelter a quarter-mile away. Inside, an empty pack, a few cans of beans and the rifle, a bedroll still warm. The name Stephen Roy Carr surfaced through state records like a ghost. 28, drifter, parole violations in Florida, survivalist tendencies. Locals remembered him scavenging behind diners, preaching about sin. No one had realized he was living in the woods. For 10 days, Carr evaded the search teams, moving at night, stealing food, slipping through farm fields. He ended up in a Mennonite community miles away, knocking on a door and asking for bread. When the farmer called the sheriff, because the man's story didn't fit his eyes, officers found a rifle buried under straw. Carr confessed within hours. He said the women's behavior had disgusted him. He said he'd been drinking. He said too many things that sounded rehearsed. The deputies stopped writing halfway through the statement. They had heard enough. When Claudia learned he'd been caught, she didn't celebrate. She only asked if they had found Rebecca's body, if she'd been cold long. The nurse beside her bed started to answer, and then just held her hand. Months later, in the Franklin County Courthouse, Carr stood trial for first-degree murder and attempted murder. He tried to tell the jury that he'd lost control, that their intimacy had provoked him. The judge refused to let the defense turn hatred into justification. The words gave panic, never made it past the bench. The prosecution presented the map, the bullets, Claudia's testimony, a quiet, steady recitation that left even the stenographer blinking back tears. The verdict came swift, guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters called it the Appalachian Trail murder, as if the trail itself were on trial. But inside the small circle of people who had loved Rebecca Wight, the story was never about a trail. It was about two women who had asked only for the simple dignity of walking through a forest without fear. Claudia left the courtroom into a world still learning how to talk about what had happened. Hate crime laws did not yet include people like her. Headlines alternated between compassion and cruelty. Some stations refused to say the word lesbian. She decided that silence, the thing that had once kept her safe, would not protect her anymore. Recovery was long. 11 surgeries, months of physical therapy, nights where sleep meant replaying the shots in order. Friends came and went, unsure how to stand beside that kind of grief. Claudia began to write because paper didn't flinch. Line by line, she rebuilt the story, not as spectacle but as testimony. The book she eventually published, 8 Bullets, became a map of its own, a guide through trauma, through survival, through the way love can outlast violence. She returned to the trail in 1995, the year the book came out. The shelter was still there, rebuilt by volunteers. She left a small stone on the spot where Rebecca had fallen, then hiked the same 3 miles she'd once run bleeding through. This time she stopped often, not from pain, but from awe at having the right to move freely again. The attack spurred quiet revolutions. Outdoor groups created new safety protocols for women hikers. LGBTQ advocates in Pennsylvania pushed for hate crime legislation. The bill would take years, but began with Rebecca's name spoken aloud in state hearings. Every anniversary, hikers still place wildflowers near the trail marker. No plaque, no monument, just petals and a moment of stillness. In later interviews, Claudia said she never forgave Carr. Forgiveness, she explained, wasn't the point. Survival was. Living openly was. He wanted us erased, she told a reporter. Every day I breathe, I disprove him. Decades have passed. The forest has grown back thick where the gunfire once echoed. New hikers step where their footprints faded, unaware that the ground holds a history of courage and loss. Yet sometimes at dawn, when the mist drifts low and the first light touches the creek, the place feels different, quiet, reverent, as if it remembers. Rebecca Wight's story ended in those woods, but Claudia Brenner's did not. She became an architect after all, designing spaces filled with windows, places meant for light. When she lectures, she tells students that architecture and activism share the same purpose, to build something that endures. In the end, the Appalachian Trail kept its silence. It cannot explain why hatred found its way into such beauty. But every step hikers take along that ridge now walks beside the memory of 2 women who once believed the wilderness could be a safe place to love. One of them proved that even after 8 bullets, love can still find a voice.